All right, the bottom line is this, guys. It was going to be hard. It was going to be very hard to beat the Japanese in the Pacific. The Japanese held thousands of small islands, small and large islands, and on each of those islands they had stockpiled food and ammunition. They had created honeycombs of tunnels and trenches and fortified positions, camouflaged artillery pieces, and deep bunkers to support troops against an onslaught. And so capturing any one island, any one of the thousands of islands, was going to take months of fighting and thousands of lives, thousands of American lives. A strategy had to be developed that allowed us to win that war and get Japan to surrender, that didn't involve capturing every single island on the way to Japan. The strategy that was developed over time, the Pacific Theater higher-ups, most notably Admiral Nimitz and General MacArthur, devised a plan to try and get Japan to surrender without having to capture all those islands. The plan they came up with was known as island hopping. At the root of this plan is the idea that if the United States could land troops on the main islands of Japan, the emperor might be forced to surrender. And when the emperor surrendered, all of those thousands of islands in the Pacific would surrender with him and would not have to be captured individually. The problem is, we can't get close to Japan. In order to do that, we need to maintain air superiority over Japan, and in order to do that, we need bases close enough that we can send fighter planes and bombers over Japan on a regular basis. So we have to get close. So the idea behind island hopping is that we will capture one island, put an Air Force base on that, and use it as a launching pad to capture another island about a half a gas tank away, leaving all the islands in between uncaptured. If we could maintain the force on this island through the Air Force bringing supplies, hopefully the Navy could bring supplies as well, but you didn't have to. If we were only about a half a gas tank away, you could maintain the island with air support. In doing so, we could leapfrog all the way to islands close to Japan and begin to launch an air campaign on Japan itself without capturing all of the islands in between. This was not going to be easy. The problem here is that every one of those islands was a major battle. The Japanese philosophy was that to surrender was cowardice. To surrender, even in the face of incredible odds. You're out of ammunition, you're out of food, there's no way you can possibly win. Surrendering was a shameful thing to do. And so Japanese soldiers on those islands would fight until the very last man was alive. They would not surrender no matter what. And so US troops trying to capture any island in the Pacific had to fight until the last Japanese soldier was dead before they had complete control of the island. This was long and painful and hard to do. That philosophy, by the way, that surrender was shameful, made it very difficult for US troops when they surrendered to, and other troops as well, when they surrendered to the Japanese, they were treated like scum. The Bataan Death March is an example of this. Japanese treated those soldiers as if they were beneath contempt. They killed them in horrible ways, starved them, refused to supply them water, put them in prison camps with no supplies, forced them to do hard labor because they saw them as shameful people because they surrendered, and surrender was seen as that bad. So this made the fighting in the Pacific very different than the fighting in the European theater. The island hopping campaign was not going to be easy. It goes in two phases, or two different directions. Admiral Nimitz and the Marines and the Navy forces go on a northerly island hopping campaign directed toward the main islands of Japan, while General MacArthur and the U.S. Army, supported by the Navy, of course, take a more southerly route toward the Philippines, which had been American territory up until the Japanese took it. They attacked the Philippines on the same day they attacked Honolulu on December 7th, 1941. There was a U.S. colony, the Philippines, a U.S. protectorate, and U.S. and Filipino troops did the best they could against the Japanese. They were under General MacArthur, and when the Japanese attacked, they were told right off the bat that they weren't going to get new troops, that they had to do the best they could to hold off the Japanese, but the numbers were overwhelming, and the Japanese pushed the U.S. and Filipino troops until they were isolated on the peninsula of Corregidor outside of Manila. While they were held up on that peninsula, the U.S. Navy snuck a very small armored PT boat through the Japanese Navy to rescue General MacArthur. He was seen as critical to the overall war effort. They couldn't rescue all the soldiers. They couldn't get troops through the Japanese barricade, but they could get one small PT boat through in the middle of the night. MacArthur told his soldiers, "I shall return," and it becomes almost an epitaph for him. He says, "This is." People joked that it would be on his tombstone, but he's remembered for saying, "I shall return," and he spends the rest of the war trying to do just that. His island hopping campaign is to get to the Philippines and take it back so he can rescue those soldiers, but the soldiers were treated so poorly by the Japanese that by the time they are rescued, there are only a few hundred of them left from the tens of thousands that were captured in December of 1941. The island hopping campaign, despite being drawn out and painful, is successful. It starts with the Battle of Guadalcanal. That battle takes 6 months and costs thousands of American lives, tens of thousands of Japanese lives. But by the time when it's finally done, the United States and Allied forces control the island of Guadalcanal. Guadalcanal is an island, not a canal. They control the island of Guadalcanal. They put 2 air bases on it, and they use those air bases as launching points for the next island hopping campaign. The Guadalcanal is in the Solomon Islands, within distance of islands held by the Australians and other Allied forces, so we're able to resupply Guadalcanal, and we use it as a way to launch an attack on the next island along, and we slowly move toward the Philippines and toward Japan. The final battles in the island hopping campaign are the battle for Iwo Jima and the battle for Okinawa. Okinawa is actually one of the islands in the Japanese archipelago. Those are long, painful battles. If you want to watch a really good movie about the Battle of Iwo Jima, Flags of Our Fathers came out a few years ago and won many awards. It's a brilliantly put together movie about the Battle of Iwo Jima. And there's a second movie that is from the Japanese perspective, and I've now forgotten the name of that one. 2 different movies, both about the same battle, both award-winning movies. But from American perspectives and Japanese perspectives for that battle, and worth seeing. Anyway, the island hopping campaign is eventually successful, and the United States is able to launch bombing raids on the mainland of Japan. That does not get the Japanese to surrender, and eventually in August of 1945, the United States, instead of landing U.S. troops in Japan, decides instead to drop our new secret weapon, the atomic bomb, on Japan in hopes of convincing the emperor to surrender. We'll talk more about the atomic bomb and its long-term impacts in the next lesson, but hopefully this has elucidated a little bit about the island hopping campaign, the reasons for it, the strategy behind it, the reasons behind it, the strategy it undertook, and the incredible cost that it entailed. Thank you. We'll talk again soon.